Radiant quests are the repeating quests in Bethesda games where certain variables, be it NPCs, items, or locations, are randomized. In Skyrim, these are the contracts to kill a giant or a dragon, or to take out a den of bandits for the local Jarl. For the Thieves Guild, you'll get Radiant quests to steal a valuable heirloom from an NPC's house, and for the Dark Brotherhood, you'll get infinite contracts to take out a random NPC at a random location. In Fallout 4, you can scrounge for tech for the Brotherhood of Steel, help escort escaped synths for the Railroad, or various work for the Minuteman settlements, all of which has randomized Radiant aspects. In the most recent single-player RPGs, Skyrim and Fallout 4, Radiant quests have gotten a mixed reception, and I will admit that Bethesda may have overused them or done a poor job in some areas of implementing them. Radiant quests have a reputation for being repetitive and uninteresting. There are countless memes of Preston Garvey harassing the player character that another settlement needs your help. But if we examine how they evolved Skyrim to Fallout 4, I think we can deduce something about where Bethesda RPGs are going. And I think it's reason to be optimistic, especially after the Microsoft acquisition. It's also interesting, in my opinion, to look at Bethesda's entire history, with the early Elder Scrolls entries, which were heavily procedural. The entire games were built around these early proto-radiant quest systems. In my opinion, Radiant quests have a lot of possibility and promise to achieve that staggering scale and immersion in open-world games. As it stands, they help to flesh out the world and provide landmarks and missions to direct the player's explorations. However, with just a little more advancement and a little more care in the implementation, I believe Radiant quests could begin to deliver very engaging and emergent gameplay opportunities in a Bethesda-style RPG. Typically, there are only a couple of variables. For instance, go to location X and get object Y, or go to location X and clear out all the raiders, ghouls, bandits, necromancers, etc. Now, that actually works perfectly fine for me when it's something like Aragro Shub sending you to find manuscripts for the College of Winterhold. What I think would have made it better was to expand the locations beyond the regular dungeons to include manors, libraries, schools. So this would give you a different challenge beyond wiping out another settlement of bandits. You could use various skills to beg, steal, or borrow the books and have another list of variables in how you acquire it. In Skyrim, there are a few more open-ended and unique Radiant quests. Deceiving the Herd is a fantastic set of quests in Skyrim, and I hope there's more of these kinds in future games. It's part of the Volkihar Vampire Clan quests, and it goes like this. Faran Sadri thinks that the Dawnguard are becoming too confident fighting the vampires, and that they need to be reminded that they are nothing more than cattle. For this, their name will need to be slandered. You have to kill someone in the streets of City X. Choose a high-profile person, such as a named NPC in that city, a merchant, a noble, a mercenary. You can optionally wear Dawnguard armor out in the streets, and you plant an incriminating letter on the corpse, making it look like a self-righteous Dawnguard member did the killing. Now that's a very cool quest, and imagine if you could do it the other way around. As a member of the Dawnguard, you could pretend to be a vampire and kill someone in order to make the town think they have a vampire problem. The adjacent quest for the Dawnguard faction is actually pretty good too, though. It's called Hide and Seek, and the player is tasked by Gunmar with going to a city and finding a vampire that is masquerading as a visiting advisor, a traveling pilgrim, traveling merchant, or traveling bard. The killing of the vampire has to be done out of the sight of any guards or townspeople. You have to be on the lookout for pale skin and red eyes. If your speech skill is high enough, you can persuade them to follow you, or you can use your own creative methods, such as shooting a bow nearby from a sneaking position, and then kill them when they come to investigate the sound. You can use illusion spells or any other technique within Skyrim systems. This is pretty basic, but I want to show how well-designed Radiant quests can work very well during gameplay and role-playing. To me, what makes Radiant quests a bit more interesting is when they are integrated into the main quests and faction quest lines. In Skyrim, there is the main quest, the Imperial vs. Stormcloak Civil War, the various faction quest lines, and then miscellaneous side quests. Radiant quests usually tie into either a faction or a location. In Skyrim, you could get quests to direct you to finding dragon lairs and words of power that you haven't yet found, so those are unique and finite rewards in the otherwise randomly chosen quest. What limits them from being as good as they could be is the very limited reputation system in Skyrim. In Fallout 4, you can get a quest from the Minutemen called Suspected Synth. The settlers at one location are convinced a certain person is a synth. You can question them and determine the truth with the hard speech check, convince the accusers to stand down and let him go, or tell the accusers to kill him. You can tell the settlers to decide themselves, or you can simply leave them alone, both of which results in the suspected synth being killed. You could just kill them yourself, either the accuser or the accused, although be careful because killing settlers can cause others to become hostile depending on what's going on. A quest like this is simple, but it works because it's the conflict of the main quest spilling out all over the Commonwealth. There's paranoia about synths taking people's identity and becoming infiltrators, and for good reason, because the Institute actually does have such a policy. You have several options on how to deal with the situation. These are kind of one-variable Radiant quests, and they can work really well. Now imagine if some of the two-variable Radiant quests had as many possible solutions. For instance, instead of clearing out a raider outpost, you could pay them off to not harass your settlement, or negotiate some kind of truce. Once variables start to increase, and the number of options each variable has start to increase, you can see how interesting things could actually get. In Fallout 4, for the Brotherhood of Steel, you have Cleansing the Commonwealth, which is basically clear out a location of ghouls. This makes sense for the Brotherhood of Steel, as characterized in Fallout 4, and for the player, as one trying to ingratiate themselves into that faction to do tasks such as this. Same with Quarter Mastery, where Scribe Halen will send you to a particular location to acquire a specific piece of technology. Further into the Brotherhood of Steel quests, there are escort missions, such as escorting a Brotherhood scribe through a location, watching their back while they are on the terminal, and getting them out and back safely. Pretty standard, but you see how they are good for fleshing out the day-to-day work of a faction. In the quest Leading by Example, you escort a child Brotherhood squire through a location and take out the enemies, then talk and check in with the squire. So you are basically training them for when they can do Cleansing the Commonwealth Radiant missions on their own. In Fallout 4, they did a good job with the factions insofar as the lower level members you meet will give you these Radiant quests and smaller miscellaneous quests, while to engage with the main storyline, you go first through Dance, then Arthur Maxon. Now, the quest Feeding the Troops from Proctor Tegan is one where I think they made a misstep on implementation. You are sent to a random farm or settlement and tasked with securing a food tribute for the Brotherhood. You can convince by persuasion, bribe, or threaten them. This is good so far. It feels wrong, but they do have to eat, and they are doing a service in some regard, but there is a moral implication to it. These people are just scraping by to survive. What I don't like is how this isn't acknowledging the whole settlement system. There are some instances in the game where you can tell others that you are the general of the Minutemen, and as such you have the authority to make decisions and allocate resources on their behalf, but in my opinion, there should be much more. That alone is a big deal, and it should give you great standing in the Commonwealth. For all the other 3 factions, and whatever towns or cities you are dealing with, such as Vault 81 and Diamond City. That's really what is lacking in Fallout 4 versus New Vegas, as far as how factions interact. What really makes for great emergent and immersive moments in gaming is when things like a Radiant Quest system and the settlement system, or a reputation system, interact with each other, and the game recognizes and accounts for that. For instance, as the leader of a faction, you could have emissaries of other factions come to you and ask for tribute, and you could deal with them by making a deal or turning them away, which could have consequences for your reputation with that faction and lead towards conflict. I think in general, Fallout 4's settlement system was a step in that direction. I think it shows Bethesda's interest in having systems that would integrate with each other and create interesting emergent gameplay opportunities, despite it coming off as underdeveloped at times. If you've ever played the Sim Settlements 2 mod, it kind of shows how a more robustly developed workshop and settlement system could have more fully integrated itself with the main quest and faction quests. Fallout 4 comes off as unfinished in some ways, with the biggest example really being that settlement workshop system. Sim Settlements 2 adds many scripted characters, quests, but more importantly new mechanics that show how a more fully realized Fallout 4, or in general Bethesda game, could operate, and really add to the depth and creativity players can engage with when they play. Nuka Worlds was actually very interesting because it's a whole new twist on the settlement system, and it makes raider groups actual factions that you can lead and deal with. There's a lot of Radiant quests involved, especially when you get back to the Commonwealth. What I don't like, however, is that it doesn't integrate well with the base game. There's not enough feedback and recognition of what you've done before. There's no way to play Nuka World as the general of the Minutemen without simply genociding all the raiders. Imagine if you could negotiate with the raider groups and, for instance, make deals that a certain raider group would agree to run the security of your settlements in exchange for food and supplies. Depending on the settlement's strength, wealth, and your reputation, a lot of different things could happen. The raiders could double-cross you. You could double-cross them. They could be defeated. They could do a good job. I don't think that something like that would have actually been too much different or harder to implement than Nuka World as it is. It has a lot of features, but they're just a little bit off if you're trying to think of the player character as a real person in the context of role-playing. Skyrim had a sheer volume of individually scripted quests that made it feel like the world was endless. In many of them, single variables were radiant or random. The options you had were in essence which quests or quest lines you chose to pursue and which you didn't. You did have an endless radiant quests for the Thieves Guild or the Dark Brotherhood, and that fits in with what those groups are made to do. Fallout 4 leaned into this hard. It had less scripted out quest lines and side quests, but in my opinion a more developed radiant quest and settlement system. What I think bothered players was how the settlement quests were implemented in a way that felt repetitive at times. I know for me, I kept getting sent to the federal stockpile to rescue a ransomed settler over and over again. I know there were more locations and quests, but for some reason I kept getting the same one. What I think would help with these quests to make them feel more unique and interesting is, again, besides simply having some kind of tracker that prevents you from getting the same one you've gotten before you get others, would be to make one of the major variables how you actually complete the quest. For the ransom settler, for instance, you can pay the ransom, or you can kill all the raiders at the location. I roleplay a lot of times to try to be as non-violent as I can, which is actually pretty difficult because most enemies are suicidally foolhardy. But I would love to be able to start shooting, and maybe they get spooked and run away. Maybe they take the person and leave a note, or maybe they kill the person and you fail the quest. You need to be able to fail the quests sometimes, and radiant quests are the perfect kind. Maybe that would affect your settlers' happiness levels and things like that. They'd say, you let so-and-so die instead of just paying 100 caps. There are really endless possibilities, and once you start adding variables, the depth and immersion of radiant quests could dramatically increase. Before that, however, you really do need a good core of locations, factions, main quests, side quests, etc. So you kind of need to build this radiant system on top of a pretty well-filled game of scripted content. These type of quests are great for fleshing out that world and providing you some direction and objectives to interact with this world. As cool as the settlements in Fallout 4 are, there should have been more unique, named, and scripted NPCs tied to each of those locations. It felt like there were fewer settlements with scripted quests and named NPCs in order to make room for the workshop settlements and radiant quests. When the only way you are interacting with the settlements is doing the repetitive radiant quests, it can feel like a grind. There are named NPCs associated with certain locations who do have their own quests, but not as many as I think is needed to make these locations feel fully alive. You can see how with another year in development maybe to make the workshop mode more fully robust and reactive to the rest of the game, Fallout 4 could have been a true masterpiece of gaming, even with the sometimes lackluster writing or lore consistency Bethesda has a penchant for. But luckily for gamers, you can play that masterpiece version of Fallout 4 if you want to learn some of the basics of modding your game. That robust modding community is one of Bethesda's greatest strengths, and despite missteps over the years, you have to give them credit for their recognition and support of their modding community. The moddability gives Bethesda games a vast life, far beyond comparable games. People are still modding and playing Morrowind and Daggerfall. I go back regularly to Fallout 3 and New Vegas over the years. I've put hundreds of hours into these games, and I know there's still tons that I haven't even seen yet. Something that Fallout 4 improved on from Skyrim, although it's marginal, is feedback from reputation. There are cutoff points where certain factions become enemies of the player. However, what is missing is a really robust system of reputation, like in earlier Elder Scrolls games and Fallout New Vegas. It should be known that with all other factions, if you are the general of the Minutemen, you should be able to say that and make deals and agreements on their behalf with other factions, especially since the whole system of the game, the settlement system, works with that faction, the Minutemen. Imagine negotiating a truce or a trade agreement between the Brotherhood and the Minutemen, and then finding wandering Brotherhood stopping at your settlements for supplies, or in turn providing protection for settlements, or unlocking technology that can be built. There are a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to quests, not taking into account that you are running all these settlements, especially with the Nuka Worlds DLC. Or in Skyrim, when factions don't take into consideration your legendary status as Dragonborn, or even the Thane of Whiterun, or the Archmage of the College of Winterhold. I am mentioning reputation because I think a robust and mathematical reputation system could interact in very significant ways with Radiant quests. For one thing, doing a good job versus refusing a quest could affect your status with that faction, but also if one faction butts heads with another. I for one think even raider groups should be a faction that is able to be at some level reasoned with or dealt with. You could pay to keep them from attacking, for instance. An interesting thing with Fallout 4 is the companions and how that system expanded from Skyrim. Companions in the game react negatively or favorably to a list of actions, and you can build your relationship with talking to them, unlocking their stories. When you stumble across NPCs looking for a place to live and work, you send them to different places, different settlements. These NPCs and settlements will comment negatively or positively about the conditions in that place. There are a lot of random and Radiant quests or events associated with them. It's an intriguing proposition to think that Bethesda may be moving towards making games that could resemble a modern Daggerfall, with new advances in AI and machine learning. It's making things possible that weren't possible before. Daggerfall was an enormous procedurally generated world, filled with thousands of procedurally generated villages, shrines, cities, and dungeons. There are hundreds of thousands of procedurally generated NPCs and quests. This was possible because so much of it was text-based, but something that was interesting was the number of variables in many quests. There were often people you had to meet first, such as a snitch or a poison maker, and then they'd tell you where the target was, and then you would have a time limit. If Bethesda can hold on to specific attributes they've always had, such as supporting the mining community and making good open-world games, plus have advances in their technology, Radiant quests, or I'm going to call it Radiant systems, then I think there could be some great games in their future. I think most people agree that linear cinematic storytelling isn't usually Bethesda's strong suit. Their strong suit is environmental design and world building. There is something special about having a game where every door is openable, every house is a house that you can go in and rummage through the drawers. Every NPC is one that you can pickpocket, or fight, or kill. I know that's not actually true, but in previous games it was, and is kind of the goal, or the feeling, of these games. That's the idea of Bethesda games anyway. And that idea has value, even if it has never been 100% implemented. There have been games like Morrowind, or New Vegas, or even Daggerfall, where it comes pretty close for the technology they have at the time. A big part of the fun of Bethesda games is making your own story within the game, and with your own character, and to navigate the world of the game in your own unique ways. I grew to enjoy the Radiant quests in Fallout 4 because they fit well within the narrative I was creating for myself and my own character, even as I navigated Bethesda's scripted main stories and quest lines. Now that we have finally gotten to look at Starfield, we can see pretty well the trajectory that Bethesda is going into. It seems that they're using more procedurally generated mapping to help expand the universe. I think this is pretty interesting. Although Fallout 4's voiced protagonists grew on me, I'm glad to see that Bethesda is going back to a silent protagonist. If only from a resources point of view, I think it will allow for more depth and variables, as we've been talking about in this video. What do you think about Radiant quests and Radiant systems? There's also the return of attributes and many other RPG systems coming back that haven't been around since Oblivion that are coming back into the games. And just the scale of a game like Starfield, there needs to be procedural generation. It's almost as if you had the game of Skyrim, but you just increased the world size 100 times, and the distance between cities was huge, and you could just walk there and run into random things. Are you optimistic about Starfield, Fallout 5, Elder Scrolls 6? Let me know in the comments below. Hit the like and subscribe button for more content. Thank you.